Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is NZXT's H9 Flow RGB Plus. This is a pretty expensive case, but one that includes a lot of different highlights. I've built in this in several different ways now, including stripping out the included fans to use Lian Li's fans and Hydra Shift in it as well, so that I can show the different options, using both a 420mm and 360mm all-in-one cooler in there. I've vertically mounted a GPU in it, and I've done a few other things, so I want to talk to you about my experiences with it, the highlights and lowlights, and the things of interest along the way during the build and use of it. I've also got a full build guide that I'll link to in the description, and I will say, if you buy the top end of this case and want to use NZXT's Kraken cooler in it, for example, it's really easy to build in, one of the easiest cases to build in, and ends up looking really nice, and cools really well and really effectively, and runs quietly, and ticks a lot of boxes for me personally. But I wanted to demonstrate a few other things of interest and problems I discovered along the way and curiosities that make it worth considering and thinking about. So as you can see, the H9 Flow RGB Plus comes with a number of fans and the ability to mount different motherboards in it. So it works with standard ATX motherboards and rear connect motherboards as well, which means that you can end up with a really stealthy looking build. I went for this Gigabyte motherboard here, which is all rear connect, makes it look really neat. But with a standard board, you can see obviously your power cables, front connection cables and things like that are visible. It's not as neat, but it is still fairly easy to wire in with some reasonably nice recessed holes for the cabling. If you want a really clean build, however, stealth BTF rear connect motherboards are much easier. Now, in terms of the fans, this is obviously the fanciest model. You can get other models of it, but it comes with two 420mm fan trays as standard. So the single frame 420mm fan setup from NZXT that you can see at the bottom here set up as intake and at the side. However, I also wanted to be able to show what would happen if you bought the other version of this case that doesn't have this fan tray in, or if you wanted to remove these fans and put your own fans in here. This has the similar issue to what the H6 Flow did, in that if you use other fans, you might have some problems. So here you can see me trying to use Lian Li's Infinity 140mm fans. You can see that they won't fit. The controller cable that clicks onto the end of the fans means that they don't fit in the slots cutout at the bottom here, which allows you to insert the fans into it. So that's a bit of a problem. If you use 120mm fans down there, obviously they will fit. So I'm using the wireless Infinity fans here, but then you end up with a gap around the bottom, which obviously doesn't look great. You can position the fans to account for this in terms of blowing onto the graphics card, but they end up with space around the edge, so it doesn't sit as flush in there. Obviously a bit of a problem, and perhaps an eyesore from certain angles. However, I do think the Infinity fans look really nice in this build. So let me know what you think in the comments, but you can see here a bit of a gap on the right hand side, and on the left hand side doesn't look as clean. At the rear, there's a lot of things to like back here as well. There's plenty of space, plenty of nice cable ties. You also have this NZXT controller included with the fanciest version of the case, which you can buy separately, but this allows you to plug in multiple F-series fans into it, and it's already wired up with the ones that are included in the case and makes the wiring pretty straightforward. I've done a detailed wiring guide on this controller and NZXT single frame fans in the past, but essentially just run with one connector on them, plug into this, and then the controller itself just requires PCIe power and a USB connection. So then it's all powered up and set up for you. The fact that this is already connected up in terms of the fans already being plugged into it makes life easier. So you've got the two single frame F420 fans in there and a rear 120mm fan connected up to it and wired in for you. So you then just got to plug in two cables into your motherboard and your power supply and you're away. You can see my cable management isn't great at the back there necessarily, but you can put all the cables in nice and neatly and then close the door really easily. And you can put a 420mm radiator in the top with relative ease. I did show in the build guide that depending on which way round you put it, you do need to potentially maneuver that rear 120mm fan. If you want the tubes on the left hand side, you have to shift it downwards, for example. But there is quite a lot of space up there, as you can see. So it's pretty flexible in terms of the mounting, which is really nice and easy enough to deal with in terms of the cabling of it. The other thing you can do is you can also do a push-pull setup there. So if you get an additional 420mm single frame fan, you can put that at the top and sandwich the radiator for even better cooling. And this did make quite a difference to the cooling performance as well. And I've got the details of that in the full review of the Kraken. I'll link to in the description. You can see all the specs of the build in the description as well, which will help. But you can see quite a sandwiched radiator at the top here, and yet it doesn't block the motherboard. It doesn't cause other issues. It looks really good still. It improved the cooling performance, and it's nice that it have that flexibility. So it's a pretty flexible case. Also, as you can see, 360mm all-in-one cooler will sit up there as well. So I wanted to use the Hydra Shift in this build. This is Lian Li's Hydra Shift 2, which sits up there. Obviously has a bit more room to sort of move around, but it gives you the flexibility to be able to mount it so that the tubes go straight down to the CPU block, which looks nice. Now, one of the other things you can do if you want to is you can remove the angled bracket with the fans on it, which has it set to intake there. Then at the bottom, you can pop off this little cover down the bottom there, which then opens up some additional space. Now, this isn't necessarily very eye-pleasing, but it gives you the option then to, instead of having fans on the side, to put your cooler on there instead. So you can take a 420mm all-in-one cooler and put it there. Obviously, if you want to use a 420, you need to remove that bottom plate, and that's the whole point in that. And then you could put this on there, and I'd recommend, if you're going to do this, setting it to intake fans instead of exhaust, so flipping the fans over and mounting it at the side. I found in other builds that this provides better cooling for your CPU while not negatively impacting the graphics card as well, so it is worth considering. But the downside to this is that you can't do a push-pull on the side. I tried, it won't fit, so that's one problem there. And maybe it doesn't look quite as nice, and it might affect the longevity of the pump over time, but over a long period of time. But you have the option, so it's nice to have those options to choose where you're going to do things and how you're going to set it up. Sadly, NZXT doesn't have reverse blade fans just yet, so you do have to see the backs of the fans for this. Now, in a previous video, I commented about how the vertical mounting in the graphics card wasn't possible. So I had an NZXT Vertical GPU mount and put a 4090 onto it, and then tried to mount that into the case. I found a couple of different issues. One is that the Kraken cooler has a massive pump cap on it, a really huge display, but the bigger problem seemed to be that the bracketing wasn't sitting into the case properly. I found that pushing it into the PCIe brackets to the rear, it wouldn't sit in there. Now, it turns out, after talking to NZXT, that this was a user error in that I have the wrong version of the vertical mount. Basically, it was interfering with the rear of the case, and it has been changed. NZXT has changed the design of their vertical mount. So it is worth noting that, because I was having this problem with this one, but there is a newer model. So if you do want to do it, make sure you buy the newer version of it, which you can see here. They look very similar, but they have a slightly different marking on them, which shows basically on the box, one, that it supports the H9 and the previous versions of the H9, and two, that it has a different serial number, which points to a different production date. This is a PCIe Gen 4 riser cable, not Gen 5, it's worth noting, but it will secure into this case and basically works as you've seen, so you can install it with this. So if you want to do a vertical mount, you can do it. And so just watch out for that, and I'll leave a link in the description that talks a bit more about this and the changes that NZXT's made to it. But you basically just plug your GPU into the riser cable and then put that into your motherboard and install it by removing the PCIe brackets at the rear and setting that in there. Now, the other thing to note is this is obviously an additional purchase. It doesn't come with the case. It's just a nice extra, but I thought it was interesting because I know people probably want to do this sort of thing, and it caused some issues here. The other thing with this, though, is unfortunately it has a little extendable foot here. It's meant to help support the bracket, but that won't go far enough down to actually touch the bottom, so you can't get any support for this. So it's something to think about. There's no anti-sag capabilities there. I also use Lian Li's RGB streamer cables for this setup as well to run the cable through there. And I want to note that I did mention in the video on the wireless variant of this that it's a little bit difficult with this case to ensure that the cable sits in nicely at the bottom. because of the way it's angled, it's pretty tricky to get in there. And you might have noticed that from some of the other shots where it's not vertically mounted. So watch that video if you'd like to find out more about it. Now, in terms of storage, the rear door allows you to put 4 SSDs into it. There's also an additional tray just below the power supply unit, which I've taken out in this shot, but you can put extra storage in there. So there's loads of potential room for traditional storage, as well as obviously having NVMe storage on your motherboard. And with all that at the back, you can still close the back of the case really easily, and you've got good airflow there thanks to that rear panel. So there's a lot to like in the setup, as you can see already. It ends up with a really clean build and pretty nice features. One downside is if you want to use a standard motherboard, you have to pop out this little cover here to remove that to be able to run the power cables for the motherboard and the front connectors and other things through the side here. This takes away from the nice design that you get with the rear connector motherboard. So it's worth noting that, because the cable hiding element has now disappeared from there, and instead you end up with these sort of ugly holes. Well, that's fairly standard with most cases. It's just nice if you focus on what you get with the BTF or rear connect motherboard setup. You can see here, it looks really clean. So in terms of thermal performance, I want to talk about that briefly. Push-pull setup with the Kraken, which is a bit bonkers, obviously. But what I found is that gaming performance here was really good. Standard fans are really quiet. It runs really well, not too loud at all. And as you can see, both the GPU and CPU are below 60 degrees when playing at 4K in the finals. If you want to find out more about thermal testing, check out my Kraken Elite review. I went into more depth on this, but I just wanted to show some of the elements of just general use of it and how it got on. And then with the Hydra shift, obviously slightly different setup here because it's 120mm fans throughout and a 360mm radiator. And now you'll see the CPU's running a bit hotter. GPU was similar, but the CPU's getting like 10-15 degrees hotter under the same sort of use cases. So that's one thing to keep in mind there, that obviously lesser fans, smaller radiator has an impact. So perhaps sticking to the standard setup that you get with the top end of the NZXT case is the way to go. So it's an expensive case at the top end of it, at the highest premium, but it does come with a lot of things and a lot of really nice features, and it looks really good too. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.
You've made it right to the end of the video, you brilliant legend you. If you've enjoyed it, click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and drop me a comment down below if you've got any questions. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining the channel and see the benefits of doing so. Check out these other videos. You might well find them interesting or useful. And most importantly, have a great life.